Hello everyone, how you doing? My name is Kaden and today's another episode of the PUFC podcast. In today's episode, we are joined by Peterborough United press officer Phil Adlam. I really enjoyed speaking to Phil. He's a great guy and he really knows what he's talking about. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I enjoyed speaking to Phil and I hope you stay until the end.
So first off, Phil, do you mind telling the viewers about your background and just a bit about yourself in general?
Yeah, so I was a Peterborough fan, obviously, before working at the football club. I grew up in Whittlesea, which is obviously not too far away from Peterborough. I lived there until I was about 22, and I got the job at Peterborough when I was 18. I was doing a media course at college, didn't go to university. I was kind of fortunate, really, because the course I was doing at the time was just a written journalism course. And I think when I started it, there was only 3 people doing the course. One person did it intensively inside a year, and the other person dropped out. So I ended up having sort of one-on-one tutorial through that period of time. So I was very fortunate in terms of the course that I did was very beneficial to me. And then obviously I was in the right place at the right time when the club wanted to sort of bring in an editorial assistant on very little money. I was living at home at the time, so it was obviously an opportunity that I was never going to turn down, given the fact that I was a big supporter of the club at the time, going home and away. So it was all about timing, and thankfully I'm still here now.
So you've been at the club for about 19 years now. How's it been so far?
Well, it's been a real challenge because obviously when I started, there was no such thing as Zoom. There was no such thing as Twitter. There was no such thing as Instagram. When I first joined the football club, it was I think Facebook was just about starting around that sort of time, but it was more about connecting with friends rather than using it as a way of sort of advertising the football club. So a lot of things have changed. I mean, when I first started, the newspaper was daily. There was a free newspaper. There were 5 radio stations in Peterborough that were coming to press conferences. Whereas now, obviously, the newspaper is weekly. There's no free newspaper, and there's only BBC Cambridgeshire that cover the football club. So it seems bizarre that as we've moved on, there's been less and less media organisations. But obviously, guys like you have come up with YouTube channels have sort of paved the way for different ways of communicating, different ways of discussing football clubs, and it's interesting how things have changed.
So you've spoken to many players over the years. Who did you enjoy speaking to the most?
The first ever interview I did was with a guy called Richard Forsyth, who I actually spoke to in the summer when I was doing the sort of lockdown interviews. And it was quite weird because that was the first interview and I didn't know I was doing it. It was the guy I was working with at the time just said, right, you can interview him. And he walked through the door. I had nothing prepared, nothing at all. And I sort of thrown into it. And he was really, really nice to me at the time. And I'll never forget that. I think in terms of the most sort of entertaining interviews are always with people who tend to be strikers, if I'm honest with you. Jack Marriott was always good fun to interview. He did quite a lot of interviews because he's obviously scoring a lot of goals. Obviously, Gabby Zakwani, he's always a good person to speak to because he's so enthusiastic. And that's what you're looking for, really, when you're doing an interview. You're looking for someone who's engaging, someone who comes across well, someone who has a personality, and someone who can talk about, and answer the questions you want to ask, but also sort of develop his answer into something different. And they're always the best interviews for me.
So what was it like when Darren McAntony brought the Posh back in 2007 for £1?
Well, obviously it was quite an exciting time because, at the time Barry was the owner, he was manager as well, and then obviously went into director of football and then owner, and we had a lot of challenges in and around that sort of time. So to be, linked with someone coming in to buy the club, it was very exciting. I remember the first game was against Everton in the League Cup, and I'll always remember that day because not only was it Darren's first game sort of in charge of the football club, but I remember getting a car park ticket that day, and so I used to park outside the front, and I remember saying that it was such a stressful day with something going. It was live on TV, that game as well. There was so much going on, big crowd, and yeah, I got a car park ticket. And I remember going to the council and trying to beg and plead to get off it on the basis of stress. But yeah, Barry's been fantastic for the football club, not just in terms of fact that he's obviously pumped so much money into the football club, but also because he's been very approachable from a media perspective. Obviously, he's out there front and centre. If you want to contact Barry, you can do so. And I think that's been the most important thing. I think people always say to me, "Oh, it must be a nightmare having a chairman on Twitter." But I think from a fan perspective and from an employee perspective as well, I think the most important thing for an owner is to be visible, to be able to be contactable. You see so many owners that sort of hide behind everything, and you can't contact them, and that's the last thing supporters want. So it's certainly been a roller coaster. You know where you stand with Darren. That's certainly the best way of being an employee is to know where you stand.
All right. So, what's been the most iconic moment you've seen watching Posh play?
Iconic moment. Wow. I think everything around the playoff second leg against MK Dons in 2011 worked perfectly. I mean, I think that I remember obviously the first leg we got battered really, and obviously Grant McCann scored very late on and gave us hope for that second leg. And what we wanted to do with that second leg was just try and build on. We knew it was going to be a sort of wonderful atmosphere because we knew the supporters would come out. It was obviously a warm night, short sleeve shirts. Everybody was up for the game. But I think because it was MK Dons, we sort of played on the fact that they were quite a new team. So we obviously got a lot of former players to come and be sort of paraded to the crowd beforehand. And I think that lifted everybody because they could see that we were a club based on a real rich history, whereas obviously MK Dons were a new club and they had very little of it. And I think everybody remembers that night, and obviously it set us up for the final. But I think the semi-final, the goals we scored, obviously Grant scoring early, obviously Mikhail Smith scoring, James Wesolowski's tackle, just everything about that night was something I'll never forget.
All right. So, how much has your role changed at the club over the years?
Well, it's changed dramatically, really, because as I say, I came in as an editorial assistant, and my role really was just to assist with the matchday programme, just help write content for that and the fledgling website at the time. Obviously, now with social media, you have a reach where you can talk to supporters in an instant. People don't want to click through to websites. They don't want to read stories. They want to know what's going on straight away. That's the modern era that we live in. So you have to adapt in terms of learning how social media works, how you handle yourself on social media, how you answer questions. It is a 24-hour job, really, in terms of, if you don't reply to someone within 2 minutes, they want to know why. So you have to put yourself out there and make sure that you're available. Obviously, social media is part of that. Obviously, doing school assemblies in the last sort of 5 years has been something that I've sort of added, to just try and reach as many new supporters or potential new supporters as we can. And obviously, with coronavirus, we're now doing sort of virtual school assemblies, which is another way of getting players in front of potential supporters. Because when you're doing school assemblies, you're doing it at a time whereby obviously players are going to be training, so you can't take players into schools. Obviously, virtual school assemblies, you could tailor it so that players can actually be in front of classes. We've got one tomorrow afternoon with Kim Bolton's school. We've got one on Friday with Oundle's school. Flynn Clark's doing the one tomorrow, so he'll essentially be sitting in our classroom at the training ground and answering questions from people, children 9, 10, 11 years old. And it might not be like the toughest interview they'll ever face, but it's something that they'll always remember. And I think that's something that we have to build on from what we did with the Schools Initiative and obviously the Family Club of the Year.
So, what's your favourite part about working at the Posh?
Favourite part, I think from a purely selfish point of view, listen, I'm in a privileged position because I'm getting paid to watch football, and I think everybody would want to be doing that. And it's even more so at the moment because obviously supporters not able to watch games or haven't been able to watch games for the last 2-3 months. So to be able to be inside stadiums and watch football, we are privileged. We are lucky that we're able to do that. And what we've tried to do is obviously tell the story of the game. We're obviously reliant on technology for that, but we want to try and bring as much of what we can within the stadium to life, really. And the pre-match show that we've started doing is another way of, engaging people. Because the worst thing for us is if supporters get used to switching on iFollow at 2:59, watching the game, and closing their laptop, because ultimately when they come back, we need them to be inside the grounds for 1:30 because we need them buying food, drink, buying programs and having that whole match day experience. So that's why we've sort of brought the match day show to go live at around about 1:45. So it educates people to sort of know that, Peterborough United starts at this time. We want to get involved in this kind of show and obviously get themselves ready with their snacks and whatever it may be to watch the game at 3:00.
So what was your dream job as a child?
Well, I always wanted to be a newspaper journalist. Growing up when I was sort of 11, 12, I used to write match reports at Sunday League football. So there used to be a thing in the Peterborough Telegraph called the Tuesday Match, which was a sort of light-hearted look at Sunday League football. And they used to do ratings at the bottom and play on words with the players' names, etc., etc. And that's what I started to do, and I really enjoyed it, and that's why I wanted to sort of do a media course. But it was always geared towards being a newspaper journalist, really. I used to read a column by a guy called Ian Waldridge, who used to write in the Daily Mail, and he was the sort of person that inspired me to want to become a journalist, really. And I kind of fell into the working at the football club role, but having worked in it for the last 19 years, I can't really see myself doing anything other than working within a football club environment. Every day is different. You go in and you might think you've got this going on, and then Barry will come through and say we're signing a player, and suddenly everything is completely different, and you have to prepare for that. And sometimes you get a little bit of warning, like we did with the Sammy Smodic deal, and we were able to do something a little bit different, where we had him, obviously reading tweets and doing all kinds of stuff that you were able to do and be a little bit creative for, because often it'll be the case of signing a player, he's in Liz's office, he's signing the paperwork, and Darren's telling you you've got to put it out within 5 minutes. And then it's, crazy to get the story ready and the tweet ready and everything around that. So you have to roll with the punches a little bit and be adaptable. But that excitement and that buzz about you getting all that stuff prepared alongside Joe and Jake and Chris within the office is really exciting. And that's what you live for, really.
So what's your favourite stadium Posh have ever played at?
Well, from a media perspective, Chelsea was wonderful because everything's in the right place. You're not just in a wonderful stadium, but where the press box is to the press room and where the tunnel is literally within about a 20-yard walk. So everything is in the right place, and that's what you're looking for. From a football stadium perspective, obviously, from my end, the last thing I want to be doing is being right at the back of a stand, because obviously you've got to get down to the front, get the manager, and then get to the press room. And sometimes that can be on the other side of the stadium. Certainly at the moment, we're obviously doing everything pitch side, but there are certain stadiums like Preston, for example, whereby the press box is on one side, right at the back, but the press room is completely on the other side of the ground. So you've got to do all of your match report, get that on, get the tweets done, and then leg it basically across the other side of the stadium, because the manager might often be waiting for you to get it done. And certain managers down the years will want to do it straight away, and certain managers won't. But you've got to be in the right place to administer what's required. Tranmere was a bit of a nightmare because you have to go outside of the ground to get back in. And we had a live BT game a couple of years back where Danny Lloyd scored a hat-trick, and you went out the ground and the door was locked, so I couldn't get back in. I'm banging on the door. By the time I got back in, Danny Lloyd had almost finished his BT interview, so that was a bit of a nightmare. But I think from a purely stadium perspective, taking away the job that is involved, obviously I've worked at Wembley and I've worked at Old Trafford, and those two stadiums are unbelievable theatres to sort of play football in. And I think that you never take for granted when you're sort of looking around and seeing the stadium. And Old Trafford, obviously, with everything that went with it, we were there the whole weekend. We were in a hotel. We went to the stadium on the Friday and had a look round and went in the dressing rooms and all that kind of stuff. And as I say, those kind of moments and those kind of stadiums that will always stay with you, especially when you go to some of the less glamorous ones, shall we say.
So you've seen many players at Posh over the years, but if you had to pick a player who you enjoyed watching play the most, who would you go for?
I think I'd go for George Boyd. I think that it's almost like a Messi-Ronaldo conversation if you ask a Peterborough United fan. Certainly ones in the modern era of who you go for best in terms of skill set, because I think Lee Tomlin probably had more natural ability. But obviously he was a little bit of a you could have that side to him where he'd be a little bit aggressive and obviously had sending offs on his CV. Whereas George, I think, particularly in the early days, he was like poetry in motion to watch. He could glide past players. He wasn't the quickest, but he had that real ability to pick a pass, score goals. And obviously, it didn't work out for him when he came back in the summer in terms of the game time he got last season. They probably wanted, and obviously this year, it was really difficult for him. But if you look upon his whole career, I would say George.
So are you looking forward to the future for the Posh? Because obviously in about 5 years' time, we should have moved into our new stadium.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, obviously, I've grown up being on the terrace at London Road. Obviously, that's where I watch the games from. I'm obviously in the press box. It hasn't changed much down the years. So I think for the future of the club and obviously for the community and everything that goes around it, you have to roll with the times and modern stadiums are the way forward. And the most important thing that we need to do when we go into that new stadium is to bring the history with us. And Randy Thompson, our co-owner, is very keen to make sure that nothing gets forgotten, because when you move to a new stadium, you don't want it to be soulless. You want it to have that Peterborough United vibe, and that's certainly something that we will make sure happens, so that when you go to the new stadium, you don't forget the past, because that's incredibly important for the football club to build on the fan base that we have and obviously grow it moving forward.
So recently you've been doing the pre-match show for the Peterborough United YouTube channel, and how's it been so far?
It's been a challenge because, as I say, presenting is not something that I do really, and it's not something I've trained to do either. So having a live production, we obviously have an earpiece in when I'm talking, and Jake is doing all the production up in the press box. So we do a number of the interviews as a pre-record that we'll do close to the match day, so keep it fresh basically. Obviously, because we've got archive footage, we have the ability to play classic games and classic footage, which we've been doing as well. So it has been a challenge. It's been successful. I mean, we've obviously got a sponsor for it. McGeorge have been very good with us in terms of that, and ABAC have sponsored part of it, and the fact we're able to do the manager live to deliver the team news has been really good as well. So again, it's just something you have, in 2020, you have to adapt and do things that you probably wouldn't have done, in 2019. But it's been enjoyable, and the feedback of it has been really good as well. So that's been really positive.
So what advice would you give for someone looking to take the path into the football industry?
I think first and foremost is you have to be, what's the word? You have to put a lot of time and effort into it, because a lot of people love this industry. A lot of people will try and get a job in this industry. You go for a job in this industry, there's going to be 200 people that want the job. I think for me, having a degree or anything like that is not necessarily the most important thing. As I didn't go to university, I was lucky, but I did put a lot of time and effort into to try and get noticed with the people that I wanted to. You got to bang down doors, really. You've got to try and get a foot in the door, make yourself indispensable, make yourself noticed. You're doing the right thing because you're doing it from a really early age. You're putting yourself out there to be shot at, to be laughed at, to be judged. But that's ultimately the best way of doing it, because people will look at your portfolio and think, well, he's sitting there, he's got a crest behind him, he's got all the technology, he knows what he's doing, he's asking the right questions. Not being afraid to ask difficult questions, and that's ultimately what people will look for. It'll be what experience have you got rather than what qualifications you've got. So that's what I would say is that keep doing the things that you're doing, and if people are watching this that think that because they're going to have a master's degree it's going to get them a job, it's not. What is going to get you a job is the ability to graft and put the time and effort in.
The final question I've got for you for this part of the episode is, will Peterborough United play Championship football next season?
Well, let's hope so. Obviously, we were very disappointed with how things ended last season, but we have to use that as a motivation to try and get up this year. We've made a good start, and this league is tough. It's relentless. Particularly with COVID, it's going to be Saturday, Tuesday a lot of the time. It's about your squad rather than the 11 that start. I think we've assembled a really good squad, and I think that consistency is going to be the key. The manager's spoken about it. It's about making sure that you can get consistency in performances, but ultimately it's about results. And we are fortunate that we're in a position at the moment, as we speak here at the moment, with the win on Tuesday night. We're in second place. We're in a good position, and we've got to build on it, basically. So will we have championship football? Let's hope so.
So now, Phil, I've got a few Q&A questions to ask you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
But before we do get into the second part of today's episode, this video is proudly sponsored by the Hard Truth Podcast. The Hard Truth Podcast is a podcast hosted by Posh chairman Dan McAntony and his co-host Philip. In their podcast, they shine a light on the hard truths behind the football industry. They produce some great content, their podcast is amazing, and I'm not just saying that because they sponsor my channel, I'm saying it because I generally enjoy their podcast. I listen to it every Wednesday, and they've not asked me to listen to it. I listen to it by choice. I really do enjoy their podcast, and I hope you do too. So the link to their podcast is in the description, and without further ado, let's get on with the second part of today's episode.
So this is from Ashley Mumford. He says, I want to know if we are going to stop selling our players to big clubs and start pushing for the Premier League. Our city is big enough.
Well, first and foremost, I'm not the one selling them. But I think what people have to remember is that, we are Peterborough. Our average attendance is around about 6,000. If you have players who are scoring as regularly as what Ivan Toney was, what Craig McHale-Smith was, the big clubs are going to offer money that a club of our size can't refuse. And ultimately, you want the clubs to survive. You look at the clubs like Bury and Macclesfield, who've obviously gone out of business. And that's because partly down to poor ownership, but also their recruitment. Our recruitment has been second to none over a long, long period of time. And, you can't keep hold of every single player. I think even if we'd have stayed in the Championship when we obviously lost to Palace on the last day of the season, we'd have had to sell some of those players at Championship level. So at League One level, you're not going to be able to keep hold of your best players. The ambition of the football club is obviously to be a Championship club and to see where it goes from there. And that won't change whether we have to sell players or not.
So the next question is from Jacob Craig. He says, why did you want to be part of the mighty Posh?
Well, as I say, I was a supporter. My first game was in 1991. My dad took me. I used to go on the Glebe Road Terrace, which is what the South Stand is now, with my dad. My dad used to work as a social secretary at Hot Point, and back in those days, you had beer sponsoring games. Like Tetley used to sponsor the games all the time. So my first game, my second game actually, was part of the sponsorship sort of package. So against West Brom. So I'd always been a supporter, and then obviously when I got older, 15, 16 years old, I used to go on my own on the terrace. I used to go on the supporters bus to away games. I've never missed a game. I was a season ticket holder. So when the opportunity came up to work for the club that I loved and still love, it was a no-brainer, really. I don't, I wouldn't want to really work for any other club, to be honest with you. I love working at the football club, and I don't really know what it'd be like if I worked at another club, looking on a Saturday afternoon to see how the club have done.
Yeah, so it must have been great to work at the club that you supported as a kid, and it would be a dream for someone to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah, of course. And as I say, I'm very fortunate. There's not many people that can put their hand in the air and say that they are working in a dream job. And I am extremely fortunate to be able to do that. And I never take it for granted. I never moan and groan about the fact that I'm making a long journey to Carlisle or Plymouth or wherever it may be, because ultimately, I'm getting to watch the club I would have watched had I not been in employment.
So the next question is favourite duo at the Posh. I think their mean is in favourite manager and assistant manager, 2 strikers up top, or even 2 centre-backs.
I think that from my point of view, I got on really well with Ryan Bennett and Gabby Zakwani from a media perspective and also from a social perspective. In fact, tomorrow afternoon I'm doing a Zoom with Gabby and Aaron McLean for the pre-match show on Saturday. And it's important, I think, to keep in touch with people that have obviously played for the football club, because you never know when you're going to need them. Those two were brilliant to work with from both a social and a media perspective. obviously McLean and Mikel Smith exactly the same. Management, I mean, obviously Darren has worked with a number of different assistants, from Kevin Russell, Gavin Strachan to Mark Robson now, and they've all been really, really good to work for. I think from a media perspective, having a good assistant manager is almost as good as having a good manager, because a lot of the time you're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis in terms of the training schedules and all that kind of stuff. So Mark Robson's incredibly organised, and that's ultimately what you want when you're a media personnel.
So the next question is from Dan Wood. They've said, what is your favourite ever Posh moment? Obviously, I think I've already asked you this question, but if you had to pick another moment, what would you go for?
Well, I know what Dan's referring to. It's not a favourite moment at all. It's the worst moment. When we got relegated at Crystal Palace, Dan was the kit man. He's obviously working in the ticket office now, but he was the kit man. And obviously part of my role at the full-time whistle is to go and get the managers to do the media. But obviously we'd just been relegated in the most cruel way possible. And it was incredibly emotional, actually. Dan came out of the dressing room. So he was standing in the tunnel area at Crystal Palace. Darren came out. He was visibly emotional. And I think we stood in the tunnel for a good 20 minutes without saying anything to each other at all. We were just shell-shocked by what had happened. That's the worst moment I've ever experienced in football. And I don't think it'll ever be beaten, to be honest with you. I think in terms of, obviously, best moment, listen, you can't say that 2011 beating Huddersfield at Old Trafford will ever be beaten, because there was so much involved in that. Darren managing at Old Trafford, where his dad had been so successful, Huddersfield having all those flags, having all those supporters, the fact that the 3 goals came in 12 minutes, the fact we were there all weekend, the fact we went back to the hotel and the chairman put a free bar on, the fact that the trophy was being passed around by everybody. It was an incredible weekend. And the fact we obviously got promoted in the way that we did and the manner that we did was something. I think Grant McCann's free kick was as iconic as you're ever going to get in modern Peter United history.
Yeah, so I've not been supporting Posh for that long, but in like a couple of years, you experienced going up to the Championship, beating Huddersfield at Wembley, to going back down to losing at Crystal Palace. So I'm sort of glad that I didn't support Posh then, but it would have been great to go to Old Trafford and experience something like that. So the last and final Q&A question is from Pete Short. He says, who's your favourite player of all time?
Favourite player of all time? Well, other than George, who's certainly been the player in the modern era, I actually interviewed during the summer a guy called Tony Adcock, who played for Posh in the early 90s when we were in the Championship as it is now, the old First Division. And he was an incredibly intelligent footballer. Played up front with Ken Charlery. He scored some incredible goals. And funny enough, at the moment, part of my archive stuff is looking at that 93 season and the goals he scored, the different types of goals he scored, the intelligence. He was someone that I think people who have lived through that era will always put in their top 5. And for me, I think as well, because I was mascot and Tony Adcock was my favourite player. So I've got a picture of me aged 10 with Tony and his ginger hair. That Tony, not me. That moment is something I would never forget. And obviously, because it's associated with Tony, obviously that when he means that he will always have a place in my Posh memory bank.
So that's all the questions I've got for you, Phil. Thank you for coming on, and I really appreciate your time.
No problem at all.
So thank you for watching today's video of the PUFC podcast. I really do hope you enjoyed it, and thank you to all of you that stayed till the end. A big thank you to Phil for coming on my channel, and I hope you found today's episode interesting. I learned a lot about Phil that I didn't even know myself, and I also hope that you learned a lot as well. So thank you for watching today's video. I really would appreciate if you could like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.